Hylands was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, born in early 1872. The date is unconfirmed, but most census records state that it was early or late February of 1872. We're never going to know, though, because each census record with his name in it says something different. They just have the year, which is 1872. And his father was Charles Hylands, who is a locomotive engineer, and his mother was a housewife. And they could not have expected that Fred was a musical genius. And this was evident from about the age of 4 or 5. And in 1875, Fred then had a sister, whose name was Etta. And she turned out to be just as musically talented as he was. And by the 1880s, Fred's parents had him and his sister start to perform around the Midwestern area in which they lived, such as in Ohio and in Kentucky and throughout Indiana. And by the mid-1880s, Fred was already performing in local shows and completely doing them himself by being the producer and the one who wrote it. And this is when he was about 15, he started doing this. And there is even a section from a local Fort Wayne newspaper in 1887 that lists a program that he did himself with his sister performing as a singer, and Fred not only playing fiddle, but also piano. His first instrument was most likely fiddle, by the way, which a lot of these pianists did start on fiddle first, rather than piano. And it was also in 1887 that his father had opened a saloon, which was also a grocery store. So you get both things at the same time. You can get your music with your booze. And you can get your dry goods, too. So this was the first time where he was more close to home playing music, and where he could first play at a saloon for anybody that came in, and probably heard other people play as well. Of course, there's no way we can know this, but he possibly heard local musicians from the area playing all sorts of different kinds of early styles of the rag and early syncopated music that, such as the music that Ryan Wishner and I exhibited yesterday afternoon, such as schottisches and such. It was around that time also that Freddy Hylands was a local celebrity, being mentioned about once every week in the theatrical section of the Fort Wayne Daily News. 2 of these sections included Freddy Hylands narrowly escaped death the other day in a runaway accident. Now, if anybody knows what a runaway accident is referring to, please speak up in the question section at the end, because the person who found this and I had no idea what that means. Please, if anybody knows, do speak up later. And the second section is, Freddy Hylands is attending the business college. And this is 1887, and he would have been, what, 15? Wow. That's strange. But of course, you certainly wouldn't have known that he was a local celebrity without having seen these. And that he was already being called Freddy Hylands. And that people later probably figured that out and started calling him that without even knowing. So with all of this, he continued to work at his father's saloon as a pianist and, helping around since it was a family business. And charming all the people who came in and playing at other local places until 1893, when his family decided to move out to Chicago, where the Great Columbian Exposition was taking place. And Fred most likely got local work around the fair almost immediately after moving there. And of course, like tourists, they visited all of the sites at the fair and probably heard different types of music, because supposedly this is where ragtime was first played. I mean, some people believe that, others don't. But you can come to one conclusion, that he definitely heard the earliest styles of it by this time, such as by the Sousa Band, and that Benjamin Robertson Harney was supposedly there at the same time. Just putting that out there. After the end of the fair, the U.S. fell into a recession in 1894 and 1895. And at that, they were stuck there. So they remained in Chicago. and Fred got local work there. And it took until later in 1895 until he got married to a British-born singer named Marie Stevens. Not long after marrying her, the two of them, along with Fred's father, who was still working as a railroad engineer at this time, moved out to Milwaukee, where Fred worked at the local theater out there, most likely Tony Pastor's Theater, which is where he worked in the later 1890s, and where he supposedly started, as his obituary stated in 1913. Yes, and it was in Milwaukee that his first piece was actually published, and it was called Honey, Come and See Me. And it was published by the same composer of After the Ball, Charles K. Harris. And the strange thing about this piece is that it was not written by him. It was his arrangement of a piece that was already written out. And the strange thing about it is that it was syncopated. And it was melodically strange compared to other music written in that time. And this is 1896. It already sounds like a rag. It's clearly syncopated, and the melodic changes are weird. I said it in front of the sight readers here recently, and they did not understand. They thought, is this a mistake? It looks like a mistake, but it's not. Interesting, though, that early on, he was already doing that. Yes, and after dwelling in Milwaukee after a short period of time, by the end of that year, 1896, he and his wife and his father moved out to New York. And he soon got a job as musical director at Tony Pastor's Theater on the Bowery, in which you can see there, up in the left-hand corner, that is an engraving of it, or more of a cartoon, from about 1897, when he would have started working there. And these other lovely piano players I will mention in a brief moment. So, once he started working there, he encountered these lovely pianists that a lot of us know as the early introducers of ragtime, such as Max Hoffman, who wrote Rag Medley in 1897, and Mike Bernard, who is the so-called king of ragtime, or the champion of ragtime, if you will. He won a lot of trophies. That's really why people called him that, and he thought he was the king of ragtime. And Ben Harney, who was supposedly ragtime's father, as people called him around the time that he died, because they realized that his contribution was a lot more important than they thought. And yes, Harney, important Chicago composer from not far away from where Fred was. Just putting that out there. So, once he started working there, he was their manager at the musical section of it, not at any of the business part of it. And at this time, he was also beginning to work as an accompanist for other theaters at the area, such as Proctor's Theater, Keith's Theater. People don't know these theaters. They're just popular theaters in that time that happened to be chains. They were in all the major cities in the country at that time. And you will find in little sections from these theater magazines in 1896 and 97, you will find many performances by these pianists that were probably managed by Fred Hylands. It's not mentioned, but many sections from a couple years after that state that he was the manager there. Can't connect it, but somewhere we'll find something, hopefully. Yes, and since Hylands had become a popular stage director and accompanist at this time, earlier in 1897, some executives of a local record company and talent scouts took an interest in Hylands after hearing him play at one of these lavish vaudeville functions. Could be any of them. And so these studio workers were so impressed by his skill and his odd choice of improvisations that they wanted him to become their pianist, even if they already had two already. And it happened to be the Columbia Phonograph Company that desired his services. It was a gamble, since he was a busy man at that time, and that he was a little bit more than just a trifle stubborn to convince when trying to do anything. But after that, it took a whole lot of harsh manipulating, but soon they got him to come into their studio and make test recordings, none of which survive, which is very sad. They were probably shaved off many, many years ago. But yes, and he wasn't immediately on their staff after he made test records, because the principal pianist at that time, Edward Isler, was a little jealous of this new pianist. And he had been serving there for almost 10 years by that time. So he had seniority. And so the other pianist was Frederick Geisberg at that time also. He was toward the end of his term, but he was still working there, and he was not sure what to think of this new pianist either. So the two pianists left there at Columbia, enjoyed their time they had left. And they got to see their time there fade because Hylands was coming in more often to make records. And their job was going to be taken within a few months. But he was only on trial there for the first few months. Because they couldn't have him work there immediately, because guess what he was doing? Working as a theater manager. He only came in to record old folk songs, such as The Mockingbird, Uncle Jefferson, which was a popular Negro song that one of these performers was well known for, and other popular early rag songs, such as My Gal is a Highborn Lady by Barney Fagan. By early 1898, Hylands was at last on salary at Columbia and was working there every day of the week that they made records. And later in the days, he was forced to go to exhibitions. Speaking of exhibitions, voila, the Columbia exhibition, taken in 1898. And that lovely guy at the piano is the subject of this. And everyone here, I don't need to label yet, because they're not really important here except for the guy who possibly took this image, who was Leonard Garfield Spencer. Some of you know him as Len Spencer. And he was the first rag singer to become popular on recordings. And he was likely to have taken this picture. It's not confirmed, but all evidence states, so far, that he took it. So, to explain the basis of an exhibition, these were extravagant gatherings for the intention of advertising their recordings. But that was not the sole purpose of these. At these exhibitions, 6 or 7 studio stars, hence the photograph, would come into their exhibition hall on the first floor of their building and would perform for huge crowds that flocked into the room, such as that. Oh, okay. All right. Yes, they would bring in different crowds at different times. So they would do an hour set, and then they would kick that crowd out, and then bring in another 100 or 200 people. And this would go on from about 6 in the evening to after midnight.
Yeah, hit the X. Here we go.
You hate to have those right now. You hate to get them right now.
Auto updates are off, so I don't know what's going on.
It's okay. Technology. What are you going to do? Frustrating. Yes, these sets would be demonstrating the recording process, as you could see here, with the cylinder machines and the long recording horns and cylinders on the shelves. And another thing that I'm going to point out is there are 3 electric fans in this picture. I bet none of you can see them. They're really hard to find. But after a long time of examining it, we found all 3 of them. Electric fans. This is 1898.
Where are they?
Isn't there a laser pointer on this?
I think what's happened is, if you notice, can you see your internet, your Wi-Fi signal? I think it may have degraded to the point that you're not
Oh, there we go. See, there's one there. Another one right there. My hand's shaky, I'm sorry.
By his head?
Yes, yeah. And one right there.
Oh, wow.
That's hard to see, but after a lot, and he's wearing glasses.
Oh, yeah.
You can't tell.
What's that under the Columbia? Oh, that looks like a fan right there.
That is a gas light,
Oh.
but those are electric lights. Lots of lighting, lots of fire danger.
And where's Waldo then?
Oh, he's right there.
Sorry.
He's kind of hard not to see, you know. He's like the penguin sitting over there, or the walrus, as they used to call him. Yes, they did call him the walrus, and I think it's because of this picture, actually. It doesn't help that he's wearing a tailcoat. He's dressed like a servant, too, which is even more backward and wrong. Anyway, yes, that's the exhibition. And this picture was in the Phonoscope, which was a magazine written by this guy right here. And this was in their September 1898 issue. And he's specifically identified right there. So no guesses there. These became very tiresome for him. You can easily see that. Not smiling. And he quickly grew weary of these. And he had to be pretty much at every one of them, staying from when they started until after everyone cleaned up, of which he probably wouldn't do. According to his friends at the studio, he was a popular addition to any of these exhibitions. Even after only a few weeks of doing this, he was already fatigued from it, though he knew many more were to come. They ended about the month after this was taken, though, so good for everyone that worked there. He did these exhibitions for a few more months until Edward Easton, Columbia's CEO, if you will, severed the idea. The month after that, October. In 1898, not long after he began working there, he began to openly complain about the workload he had being there. As this was the most taxing job he had ever encountered before. One of his statements read thus. Oh, what's it doing?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned because of your signal power. See if you can advance it. Can you advance it? No. Okay, you vamp for a minute. I've got to shut this down and restart
Okay.
because you've lost virtually all of your Wi-Fi signal.
It's okay, though. I have the slide of the quote, but I will read it also.
Okay.
And I will do this to get this point across better.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, that's farther along, I see. Oh,
Go there.
uh-huh. Before I say it, let me get these on because they're the most impractical, dandyish glasses ever. And he wore these, so I do that because he did. Freddy Hylands, the pianist of the Columbia Company, recently ejaculated as he sighed over wilted collar. I am hired to play and draw my salary for playing, but still this company insists on making me work.
That's good, Freddie.
Well, they put this in their comedy section because they thought it was funny, even though he wasn't really being funny. Even though he was 26 when he said this, so he was he was inexperienced, and the other pianists were probably laughing so hard after he said that. You have no idea, Fred. You have no idea what we went through. This was recorded in the same edition of the Phonoscope as that photograph in the last slide, which is very strange to think that they're in the same edition of the same source in the same year. It's kind of strange. He felt that he had a great amount of importance there, hence this quote. But in reality, he didn't, because he was just the pianist. The singers were really who was important there. And it was just him complaining, not realizing that it was pointless and taken as a joke to the staff. The pianist who came there before laughed at his useless and adolescent complaining, as he knew nothing of the harsh recording days before pantographing in pre-1896, which was making copies of records. Pantographing is making copies. After playing regularly there, after a few more months, in February 1899, he decided to begin a publishing firm with fellow recording artists Steve Porter and Roger Harding, both of whom he had accompanied on records before that. And he called their trio the Knickerbockers Publishing Company, or just the Knickerbockers for short. This firm had lasted only a single month, and Hylands was so fully engaged in making records that he could not keep it going. He only published 3 songs under this firm name, 2 of which were his own, and the other was Roger Harding's. But in March of that year, after the collapse of the first firm, he began a second firm with his local friends Len Spencer, and Harry W. Yeager. Beautiful, beautiful footer. And that was created by the hand of Leonard Spencer, who was the son of the creator of the Spencerian method of penmanship. Which is why that is absolutely gorgeous. And he just did that with pen. Yes, and this was in an edition of the phonoscope also. And that's why that is there. Yours fraternally, Hylands, Spencer, and Yeager. This was an advertisement for their firm, the first month that it existed. So this was March of 1899. This was a much more successful venture than the previous one. Hylands ran this firm like he cared about nothing. Gambling with profits and keeping everything in order, even if he really couldn't, because he had Harry Yeager do that, and Len Spencer. Harry Yeager was Len Spencer's booking agent at that time. In this firm, more than half of the music he published was either something that he wrote, co-wrote, or his friends wrote. But his name was on it regardless. He still worked very often at Columbia while running this publishing firm. So his substitute for his frequent absence was the popular ragtime pianist and dancer, Bert Green, who later became Irene Franklin's second husband, if any of you know about Irene Franklin. He was married to a writer at this time. His collaboration with Spencer on records from 1898 to 1900 are among the best examples of ragtime from pre-1900. They are sometimes even better than the examples of that of Frank P. Banta with Arthur Collins. Hopefully some of you know who Arthur Collins is and know Frank Banta, but that's not important. Their records were also good, and they were ragtime, so that's all that counts here. Yes, many more records by them were made in this time, obviously, since they were together more often, and not just in the studio, also at this address here, which is still there in New York, and is where Fred lived at the time. Yes, the building is still there. Hope to visit it sometime soon. Speaking of this, I'm prepared to play a recording. I meant to play it earlier, but it is still timely, and it is by Billy Golden, who was one of the most popular coon song singers of this time period in recording before Arthur Collins came along. And he sung more folk songs, such as Turkey in the Straw, of which he was known for singing since the 1870s. And he was a dancer at that time also. And this was one that he was known for since perhaps the late 1880s. And this has Hylands on piano. This is 1898, I realize I meant to play it earlier. But it is good to get some music in here to hear him, at least, play his signature ragtime that was very openly advertised.
Roll on the bell. Sometimes it's for Billy Golden. All suddenly photograph capital New York and the Paris.
He does a fantastic solo at the end that I'm going to skip to. And it is Keenly Side in the room? Keenly Side? No. He transcribed this for me, and I was hoping he would be here so he could hear it, but okay. Because we fixed this transfer recently because it had been played too fast. And now this is the fixed transfer at the right speed. Isn't that great?
Yes.
And that's 1898. He was already doing that. John Reed Torres pointed out that already sounds like Maple Leaf Rag, and it's not 1899 yet. And that's in New York. That's very far away from where Joplin was writing his rags. And already that sounds like that. This is an Indiana pianist from the 1870s playing a folk song, completely improvised. Completely improvised. Because that was never written down. Every version of that that's not that one sounds completely different from that. Just to put that in perspective how strange this is. And that it's really eye-opening to some people. Because, one, it's improvised. Two, it's really early. And three, it's a recording that old. Anyway, I meant to play something by Len Spencer and him, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do that. That's okay, though. I think that got the point across. Len Spencer, though, did announce the beginning of that. That was him at the beginning, which is really cool, because he's not singing on that. During the middle of his endeavor with Len Spencer and Harry Yeager, the murder trial of George W. Johnson befell the Columbia staff. And it set them all in a scramble. Amid the madness of October of 1899, Hylands had gone through his panic quicker than everyone else did. And he had thrown in a man named Rollin Chappelle Wooster. And Columbia studio manager Victor Hugo Emerson, or Vic, as Dan W. Quinn used to call him, needed a team of the best defense attorneys that New York had to offer at the time. And Hylands shoved Wooster into the volunteer pit. After throwing in some money for Johnson's defense team, Hylands witnessed the trial go by, and his sideman Wooster, sitting beside him, knowing everything there was to know about the trial, knowing all its secrets, but went through into the courtroom on December 21st, silent. He stayed silent the entire time. Didn't testify. None of the Columbia staff testified either. Not even Johnson himself testified. Put that into perspective, how. And Johnson was a black man. He was a former slave. And he didn't testify. And this was his trial. And neither did any of his friends testify either. But they all sat by and watched it go. And it must be noted also that Hylands' partner Wooster was a silent partner in his publishing firm. Only one source stated this, and that tells you how secretive it was. Wooster was very well respectable in that time, also. A Yale graduate. Dignified for the era, certainly. And, of course, speaking of Rollin, after Johnson was acquitted, he stated this to a newspaper reporter for the New York Times. Johnson is what you would call a good coon. He is too good-natured to have ever killed that woman. We're going to take him to a hotel tonight or to Mr. Emerson's home and give him a good dinner, sitting right down at the same table with him. I'm glad that I was the first person to shake hands with him after he was discharged. He can earn $35 to $100 a week, singing and whistling. Oh, Max, you walk in now. I just played the recording, and you walk in.
Well, he's here at least.
But that is exactly what he said. And yes, he did say the first part. That first part with the racial slur, he did say it. And this was his defense team saying this. They didn't sit down and have dinner with him afterward, just saying. The trial went by without a hitch, and all the Columbia staff let go of their stress and nerves after Johnson's acquittal. Wooster remained Fred's legal advisor until the end of the publishing firm. Since Spencer was so busy as a recording artist, he had almost no time to come into the firm headquarters, his house, even though it was down the street from where they worked, literally a block away from the studio. And this is partially the reason why the firm had collapsed in October of 1900. This collapse left Fred near broke and frustrated with everyone involved, which was most of the Columbia staff. But he couldn't keep that grudge because he had to come in and work with them every day, still, because he still worked there. After continuing to after continuing on a few more years and creating another publishing firm with Harry Linton, who was a music writer at this time, and his sister Etta in 1902, that one failed. He tried his hand at organizing an actors union. And this union, and he called it Knights of the Footlights, which was promising, but perhaps overcompensating by how generous it was. Before I read the letter that he wrote to one of his promised members, I'm prepared to show this. Take that in before I move on, because it's a cartoon that I drew.
What does it say?
That's Victor Emerson saying we don't allow no union nights here.
Union nights.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah, it's fine. Whatever. Anyway, here is his letter. I was going to put the glasses on, but I can't read it with that, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I guess I'm not going to do it. My dear friend, desiring to have you become a member of the above order, I send an application blank. Seeing the great necessity for a theatrical order, we are about to organize the above society. The membership fee is $10 and dues $8 per year. Payable $2 quarterly in advance, every member to receive 1 share of stock in the above organization and to receive a stamped certificate for the same. There will be no booking office in connection with this order, nor anything of menace to manager or agent. The treasurer will be under bond to cover any amount of money he may handle. This cooperative plan of this order will embrace a theatrical paper, which we will all plug for, a clubhouse in New York City for the pleasure of our members. Come stay with me. A music publishing enterprise which we are bound to make successful, as we are making other publishers wealthy, and also investments in real estate which will be voted for by our members. The benevolent part of our order will be $200 death benefit and $7 a week for sickness and a doctor. A member may buy as much stock as he desires, and he is entitled to 1 vote only, making every number equal in this respect. Hoping to hear from you at once and number you one of us. I beg to remain yours respectfully, Fred Hylands. All of that was written there. Even, well, except for the come stay with me, but everything else was how it was written. And it was published in a theatrical newspaper as a joke. They put it in saying, "Oh, what a lovely offer," sarcastically. Look at this. He's starting a publishing firm and also an actors union. Never worked though. How the man was bubbling over with unfulfilled promises. It took until mid-1905 for him to at last speak his mind to the recording managers, and it was around this time that he was part of the newly formed White Rats Actors Union. Yes, it is a segregated union, that is why the white is in it. And his first flop on Broadway, the same year that he joined the union, was a Broadway show called The Yankee Doodle Girl, which was essentially a parody of George M. Cohan's extremely successful show from just a few months before, The Yankee Doodle Boy. This was not successful, but it is where the idea for this cartoon came from. Because that is the costume that he wore in the show. And no, I did not draw that. Arthur Young, the socialist union leader, drew that. And that, about 1907, 1909. Courtesy of Charlie Judkins. Columbia dropped him in 1905. After 7 years of terrible times, he thought, even though it really was great. They finally dropped him. So, this show was considered popular, but really it wasn't. You can't find much on it anywhere. Though it is that show, though, that picture in the first slide came from, where he's in costume. Guess what you think he's dressed as? Speaking of that, what do you think he's dressed as? Right here.
A clown.
No.
A hobo.
I'm not telling you because you already know. Anybody know? No. He's dressed in a Jew costume.
Oh.
You know what?
A Jew costume. I know, I can't. I'm just, come on.
Well, it's the Shylock.
I love this guy's music, man. He had to do that. But that is his show, and you can see that it's the same character. He's wearing the same stuff, except for the brown makeup on his face and the beard and thing. But yes, that is him. And it's the perfect caricature because everything is there. And just everything about it could not be any better in personifying him. So it took a couple years of competing with his sister Etta on Broadway and creating another musical called The Beauty Doctor that was much more popular. In fact, what he's mostly known for people that know about early Broadway shows. By 1910, he got back to writing music and was also performing around New York once again. And he also became a publisher at this time again, as he was learning about the new major publishers of Tin Pan Alley. But they refused to publish his music, so he had to publish them himself. And at this time, he played in orchestra pits, composed his own music, and accompanied silent films and song slides, of which there are here at this festival. And it must be noted that Len Spencer at this time owned the theater, and he advertised showing silent films and song slides. And guess who probably worked there? Because he hired White Rats, union performers. His old friend Fred, from the recording studio. He got in a scramble with him the year after that. But I'm not going to get into that, because that was just a mess up on Spencer's part. You can ask about it later if you want. He lived as a wandering boarder with his wife Marie at this time, writing music here and there. And speaking of being a boarder, he wrote this in 1912. The Ragtime Boarding House, and notice it's 2 words. Very old-fashioned and stereotypical of him as an 1890s pianist. That's my piece of music, by the way. I took a picture of that. John Reed Torres also owns a copy of this. And Trevor Tishner owns a copy of this as well. I believe it's this edition, but we don't know yet. Exactly, haven't found it yet. How funny of him indeed to write this. Because that's exactly where he was living at this time, as you can see in the 1910 census. That he was living in a boarding house of musicians. Probably White Rats Union people too, because at this time he was still working for them as a blunt and fierce leader of them. He got the managers kind of frightened as well, because it was either you do it my way or you don't do it at all. Yeah, he was like that early on, so it kind of came back to bite him later because they kicked him out in 1911. Even if he was one of the founding members, that says a lot. So it was in 1912, the same year he wrote this, that he began working with blackface minstrel and singer Wilbur Held, of which you can see in a picture here. Yes, he's in blackface, I know. Both of them are. Yes, that is Held right there, and that's Hylands there. This was also pictured on his last piece of music, called You've Got the Ragaritis. Every time it gets me. It's so funny.
Looks like you lost some weight.
And yes, thank you for saying that, because I've pointed that out, and it's the strangest thing. Because you think, oh yeah, he'd been touring. Oh yeah, he was working at Columbia in the 1890s. That's why he looked like that. There wasn't much moving around there, because he lived far away. But then he would walk to work. But then here, he was touring. That's after many years of touring and everything else. But yes, last picture taken of him that we know of, and on the last piece of music he wrote. Notice how long his hands are, too. Just pointing that out. Yes, in 1913, about June of that year, he, his wife Marie, and Held and a few of their friends sailed off for England, where they had been scheduled to tour there, and they had signed a contract a few months before. And it wasn't until October of that year that they got to performing around the Liverpool area and in the lands near Scotland. But unfortunately, Fred had not really been well enough to go on this tour, but he persevered and went anyway. And he was especially not well after touring around a little more in England. It is unconfirmed what the circumstances were before his death, whether it was just before performance or after performance or anything, this is unknown. But he died on October 14th, 1913. He was 41 when he died.
Do they know what he died of?
I'll get to that later. That's kind of a hard question to answer. Because he died in England, no one can really get the birth certificate easily.
Or the death certificate.
Death certificate, sorry. I'm just spacing out here, I'm sorry. But yes, yes, there were many obituaries for him after he died, and there were many sections in local magazines and large magazines such as Variety and Billboard, and the Clipper as well in this time. All obituaries and papers from this time state that the immediate cause of his death was diabetes. Go figure. It's not like I wouldn't know that before. But it's probably more than just that, because, I mean, thinking of what he did back in the 1890s, I mean, that came back to bite him too. But those who probably attended his funeral, of which hundreds attended, as it stated, were probably Len Spencer and Harry Yeager, or the remaining of his recording stars. Yes, there's this, very sad. His wife sent to Variety in 1915, 2 years after he died. Really sad, edged in black. Possibly to end her mourning, since that would be a typical Victorian tradition in that time. Yes, there was certainly something that all these living recording stars who worked with Hylands earlier on stated that writer Jim Welch possibly found too crass or degrading or disrespectful to his image to put in his articles. But perhaps it had something to do with his obviously complicated and narcissistic personality. Think back to that quote from earlier that I said from 1898. Whatever it was, you can all hear him on recordings. All of you collectors out there have probably heard him before. He's on so many, and he's not rare to find on recordings. Though he's mostly on Columbia's, he's also on Zonophones, Leeds records, and maybe some Victors, it's hard to tell. But he's on thousands of them, and you've all heard him, whether you know it or not. And this is the man you heard. His written music is exceedingly rare and uncommon, but his records sure are not. Special thanks to Allie and Anna, who are the great-great nieces of Fred Hylands, for their amazing help. I thank you. Time for questions!
Right. In order for everybody to hear, what we do is we give you the microphone for the question, so I'll bring it to you. We have about 5 minutes.
Did I understand you asked what a runaway accident was?
Yes.
That's just like our car accidents today. A runaway with horse transportation.
Oh, right.
Horses panic, and whether it's in a wagon or a buggy, it upset it.
There you go.
Funny to think of it, 15-year-old Fred Hylands like,
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, over here. This one was at first.
I'm going to go back to the exhibition picture because that's great. I love that picture.
The recording industry could be a little conservative at times. Does it surprise you that they allowed him to play Ragtime as early as 1899?
No, it actually doesn't, because he worked for Columbia, and Columbia was run in a rather democratic manner for the era. And Victor Emerson and the other studio stars, such as the others in this picture, were all about the new fads. They thought, we need to find a pianist who knows this new rag fad. Oh yeah, that guy. We've heard him. He's good. He's funny. He's likable. Kind of issues, but he's great. But yeah.
It was like an early industry in that there was less refinement required.
Yeah, even though there were a couple examples of other companies doing this at that time.
Ramona?
So arrogant and really weird, and some problems, but also amazingly talented and innovative. In his time, was he seen as being innovative and amazing, or more of just a weirdo? Like because of the conservative everything that was going on during his time, wondering kind of what is, how people received him, I guess.
I mean, people were praising him a lot in his in reviews of his shows, except for that one that you told me about. But sometimes they thought he was a weirdo. Like, they kind of think he was weird at that time because they're like, okay, he doesn't have any kids. He's like married to a singer that's never home because she's on actor's hours. Okay, he's kind of weird. He lives with his dad. At this time, they're like, okay, he's kind of weird, but he's good. He'll get paid. He's not begging anything yet.
Anyone else? Just a second, front row.
Ramona, I know he made cylinder record. Did he record for discs also?
Yes, he recorded for Zonophone in a brief period around 1902 and 03 because of the union thing, actually. Because he started that first union, and the record manager, Emerson, was not okay with that. But, of course, when it failed, they were all laughing at him, so he came back. But he did make Zonophones, and we don't know if he's on Victor's, but there's a possibility.
Ah, good.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Front row again.
You mentioned his dad frequently. What happened to his mother?
His mother died in 1893. Any more questions?
Any
How about
others?
his sister?
Oh, his
good.
sister.
Sister.
Well, I said he didn't have kids, so his descendants come from his sister. His sister was, you talk about complicated. She's really hard to track. It's kind of been an adventure trying to track her in census records and anything like that, because she married like 4 times, had children with different guys, had some illegitimate children. It's like, and the thing is, the descendants come from the illegitimate child, so they're really confused, and they didn't know anything about him. They just heard stories about him being a Broadway performer and all that stuff, but they didn't know they could actually hear him. Their minds were blown when they could hear that.
Did he have any other cohorts that were like him? You mentioned, I think it's Frank Banta Sr.
Yes, Banta Sr. The Edison
People
people.
were playing right.
Yeah, the Edison people and Columbia people never intertwined because Edison was much more conservatively run company than Columbia. I guess it's because, like, you think of, okay, Edison. Start with Edison. Then think of his manager, who was musical, but was not super into managing these people. Even though, I'm trying to think of other people that did this. Because I think it's just Banta and Hylands that were known for this, really. Because there were other studio pianists, but I guess Banta's like the only one. And yeah, I guess that would be about it.
What about Booth?
Yes, there's also Booth too, Christopher Henry Hudson Booth. I mean, he wasn't known for doing that though. See, he was known for being an accompanist at Victor, but he wasn't known for being a ragtime pianist.